I've just not pushed it up far enough. Good morning, everybody. It's 10:30. The inquiry is resumed. This is into an appeal made by Dido Property Limited against Buckinghamshire Council to refuse planning permission for production space and supporting buildings for screen-based media and associated services and industries at land adjacent to the A4155 Marlow Road and Westhorpe Farm Lane, Marlow. If there is anyone new today, my name's Katie MacDonald. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and Planning Inspector, and I'm appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this inquiry. This is day 11. Usual reminders, please. Mobile phones, other electronic devices switch to silent. We'll break for lunch around 1 p.m. And we'll have an afternoon break at some point as well. No fire drills are planned. If you do hear the alarm, assume it's real and exit via the stairs that you came up. And then the assembly point is on the riverside. Toilets are just on that corridor, and the accessible toilet is just behind me. Up to yet, I've heard opening statements from the main parties. I've heard from interested parties. I've heard evidence from the appellant's master planner and scheme designer. I've heard landscape evidence, evidence from the Rule 6 parties. We've had roundtable sessions on ecology and noise. There's been a preliminary session on conditions in the 106. And I've heard most of the need evidence. Well, I think I've heard all the need evidence. Today's more about economic benefits. So today's economic benefits from the appellant side. Any procedural or housekeeping matters? Oh, okay. Mr. White, would you like to introduce your witness, please? Oh, Mr. Fraser. Sorry, I forgot, Mr. Fraser. You are having a turn today.
Good morning, madam.
Off the leash.
Yes, off the leash. Absolutely. There's a bit of maths in this evidence.
Hopefully it's not a retractable one.
What did you get? Did you do O-level maths, Mr. White? What did you get? Right. Modesty prevents me from saying what I got for maths in the GCSE. So. I got an A star. Yes, I know. Should have said that at the end. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Right. Good morning, Mrs. Evans.
Working. Ooh.
It is, yes. Just to check, do you prefer Ms. Evans, Mrs. Evans?
Mrs. please.
Mrs. Evans.
Yeah.
We'll start, please, with your proof of evidence. Take up your section 1, where you introduce yourself and your qualifications and your experience. You are the senior partner at Volterra Partners LLP. Volterra is an economic consultancy specializing in appraising the economic, social, health and equality impacts of property development and infrastructure. You've been at Volterra for over 20 years, during which time you've specialized in the social and economic impacts of major developments, including regeneration projects and transport schemes. You have a BA in maths and economics from the University of Cambridge, which is even better than my
I was going to
GCSE.
say further maths as well as the GCSE.
Further maths as well.
And a bit of degree. Yeah.
Gosh. And then you've identified some of the most relevant schemes that you've been involved in of late, including the comprehensive redevelopment of Battersea Power Station, the Shard, and proposals to expand Cambridge Science Park on Greenbelt land. You've given evidence on economic benefits of railways, industry, and several specific development proposals. And you have experience in estimating the economic impacts of proposals at different geographical levels and drawing informed conclusions on their strategic importance. And you go on to describe some of the other recent experience that you've had. Can I just ask you first, please, to just outline for the inspector your involvement in this project to date?
Yes, of course. So we were first commissioned, I think it was February, early 2021 anyway. Volterra authored the economic case, the socio-economic chapter of the environmental statement that was submitted. We did a data-driven exercise defining our view on the West London cluster. so those were all submitted with the original planning application. We then did a couple of ad hoc updates in response to LSH reports that were commissioned by the council, and I spoke at the first committee hearing, the date for which escapes me, but I'm sure that's on record somewhere. And then I was asked to provide evidence for the inquiry, focusing specifically on economic benefits. My previous evidence did talk to and report on the need and supply and demand, but obviously that's now been addressed by other witnesses.
And obviously, as the case for the appellant has moved from the application stage to the appeal stage, other witnesses have been instructed, other witnesses have given evidence on need, which you have been here for and heard. And there has been some questioning of witnesses in relation to the contents of the economic case assessment that was put forward at the application stage by Volterra, and how that compares to some of the evidence that's now being given by need witnesses. And I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that for the benefit of the inspector.
Yes, so the economic case was written at the time. We reviewed various reports that were available from industry experts, PwC, Norda City, other planning applications that had been submitted at the time, and it obviously presented our view at that point in time. The market, as we've heard, moves very quickly, so some of that work will have been superseded by the evidence that's now before the inquiry. I think it's fair to say, and I'm happy to hold my hands up, there were a couple of instances of wording that maybe wasn't precisely as accurate as it should have been in the economic case. I think one of the previous witnesses was drawn to a statement that we wrote that the West London cluster is the only place that can accommodate the highest budget production, HETV and film. Clearly there are exceptions, and I'm perfectly happy to accept those points that other witnesses have talked to. But what I would say is, whilst there are some details that have been superseded by previous witnesses, the overarching position we put forward of a growing sector. Is that no? Yep.
Gina, Harvey? They'll be watching. She'll be coming in a minute, running. Yeah, she's coming. Thank you.
Thank you. I think what I was saying was that whilst there may be differences in the detail, I think the overarching case that was put forward remains valid, which is that it is a strong and growing sector with a need for the appropriate infrastructure to support it.
So overall, if you take the evidence that was being presented by Volterra at the application stage and you look at the evidence which is being presented on this appeal, albeit it's divided between a number of different witnesses now, what's your view as to the overall consistency between those two cases?
My view is that they are consistent, that there will always be market dynamics in any market that change over 3 or 4 years, but the broad case is entirely consistent in my view.
Thank you. I'd now like to explore the extent of agreement between your evidence and that's being advanced on behalf of the council. And to do that, I'd like to start by looking at the committee report, which is CD 3.2.
Yes.
And we'll turn to paragraph 8.47 of the committee report, which is on PDF page 54. And this is in the section of the report which is considering the economic benefits of the application, at that stage. And in 8.47, we have a reference to the council's economic development officer, who advises that the film studios represents a significant investment in one of Buckinghamshire's key economic sectors and supports the delivery of the aims and ambitions of local economic strategies. They advise that it creates a number of employment opportunities, offers opportunities for entry into and progression within the film and high-end television sector, and offers opportunities for local young people to engage with the sector and to consider and take advantage of opportunities that might not otherwise be available. And it supports local businesses, the tourism sector, and an increase in GVA. So just taking that paragraph firstly, is there anything in that paragraph with which you disagree?
No, I fully agree with all of that. Very positive.
And then they say at 8.48 that they advise that traditionally unemployment in Bucks has been relatively low and consistently below regional and national averages. There's then a reference to the pandemic. And then finally, there remains a need for new employment opportunities to be created across Buckinghamshire. And at 8.49, they refer to the skills shortages and recruitment challenges. It is to be accepted that the development would need to rely on workers from outside the county. The concern has been raised in numerous representations that jobs are mainly filled by freelancers from outside the local area. The economic growth team advised that the efforts proposed in the skills and workforce development plan, which I assume is a Bucks document, to your knowledge, or is that a national document? Do you know? You might not.
I think it's one of the documents that was submitted with the application, which details what would be in the academy and culture.
Okay. Yeah. I'd got misled by the phrase development plan as to thinking that might be a council document.
I might be incorrect. we didn't author it, but I'm pretty sure was the name of that document.
And so it says that the efforts in this plan are to try and address these challenges and thus support local opportunities. They say that's essential. This plan and the activities it outlines are key to giving local people opportunities to benefit from the development and the employment it will create. I would also suggest that this is a plan that will evolve over time and may change as local industry needs change. So the fact that it doesn't cite specific training or qualifications isn't particularly a problem. The plan refers to a skills coordinator and relationships with industry and educational partners to develop training solutions. There's also reference to setting up an education task force with key stakeholders to help influence the education program. Having these relationships and the flexibility to adapt to need is key. And we'll just bank that for now and come back to the issue of the skills shortage, which has been discussed in some of the evidence to date. But if you just note that for now, we'll come back to it. And they say finally at the end of paragraph 8.49, the provision of a dedicated space on site, the Culture and Skills Academy, to be available to local organisations to deliver education, skills and cultural programmes and activity is welcomed. Again, is there anything you would like to comment on that in the officer's report?
Just that I fully support it. I think it's a really positive element of the proposal to have that on site and the commitments made to it, which will really help local people.
Thank you. And at 8.50, we then get there's a significant amount of expenditure associated with the construction and operation of the film studios. The economic case for development, which is the Volterra document we were just discussing, forecasts that the development would generate between 130 million to 155 million of production spend for businesses in the West London cluster, including Bucks, each year. We'll come back to look at the production expenditure later on in your evidence in chief. The economic case forecasts that the studios will generate approximately 338 million in GVA each year and support annual tax revenues of up to 105 million pounds and increase exports by up to a projected 102 million pounds annually. So again, I just want to understand from you, obviously you've given evidence about a lot of projects, a lot of economic developments in the UK. Where does this sit comparatively with some of the other schemes that you have dealt with in your 20 years of experience?
I mean, they're very big numbers. It's a very significant impact for the economy. I've worked on other nationally significant projects, and I would say this is sort of more of that order than all of the other projects I've worked on, where you would be looking at smaller numbers.
Thank you. And then at 8.51, the opportunity to visit locations used in film and television is a major draw for tourists. As such, the Marlow Film Studios are likely to encourage increased visits to the county there would be the opportunity, particularly through collaboration with Visit Buckinghamshire, to exploit the county's screen heritage in place promotion and to maximise the potential benefits to the tourism sector and local tourism businesses. Again, anything to comment on in relation to that theme?
I mean, that's not something I go into major detail on in my evidence, but it's certainly an added benefit of the proposals, yes.
Okay, thank you. And then we get a quote from the Economic Development Officer at 8.52, halfway down the paragraph. From a solely economic development perspective, I still hold that this proposal supports one of our priority sectors, will bring significant investment into the county and has the potential to create employment and skills opportunities for our residents and supply chain opportunities for our businesses. And then if we scroll down the page next to two final paragraphs that I want to take you to, and they are 8.62 and 8.63 of the committee report, just a few pages down, PDF 58. And at 8.62, there is discussion about the council's perceived lack of certainty regarding the need for space and the difficulties in forecasting. These are some of the themes that have been discussed with the other need witnesses. What I want to focus on for the purposes of your evidence is the final sentence where it says, however, notwithstanding these uncertainties, the proposal represents a significant investment in one of Buckinghamshire's key economic sectors and supports the delivery of the aims and ambitions of national and local economic strategies. So Mrs. Evans, in terms of your evidence, if we were to just park the whole need issue, and we see what the council's position is here, if we park the whole need issue, even on the council's case regarding need and the question of uncertainty, where do you see the council's position in terms of recognising economic benefits or otherwise?
They fully recognise that this is one of their priority sectors that supports good quality jobs, economic value and growth, and therefore that this sort of opportunity to grow that sector will be beneficial to the Buckinghamshire economy.
And then finally at 8.63, we see the proposals, if successful as argued for by Volterra, would create employment and skills and training opportunities and would also support local businesses, the tourism sector and an increase in GVA. The proposals would support the expansion of the successful Metro London cluster and promote skills development in line with government industrial strategy. The provision of purpose-built studios of this scale would represent a significant economic opportunity, given the scale of ambition the government is now advancing in respect of the TV and film sector. Just pausing there, this was a comment on the scale of the ambition of the government back in May 2024, obviously the previous government. What is your understanding of how, if at all, the government's ambition, the scale of that ambition in relation to the TV and film sector has changed with the new administration? It's
only increased, yeah, positive.
And then finally, critical to realising these opportunities would be the proposed skills and workforce development plan, which would be secured as part of a consent. On this basis, the economic benefits are significant and can be afforded significant weight in the planning balance. Now, just carrying that forward into the appeal, if we go to the planning statement of common ground, this is CD 7.1. Paragraph 5.7.
Yes.
We see again, the council considers that the socio-economic benefits should be afforded significant weight in the planning balance, and the appellant considers that these benefits should be afforded substantial weight. Now, again, you've been involved in a number of appeals, a number of cases. Insofar as in this context, the council's recognising significant weight, where do you see the extent of the disagreement between you and the council compared to some of the other cases that you've been involved in?
Well, I would say there is less disagreement because both parties understand and acknowledge the benefits, and that, whereas there are plenty of cases I've worked on where there's been far greater disagreement on those points.
Thank you. Let's now turn to a different theme, which is the national policy context to your evidence. And trying to understand what might be feeding into that judgment about substantial weight being afforded to these benefits. We just situate ourselves in national policy, and obviously the place to begin in that exercise is the up-to-date current framework, which is CD 11.5. And we'll go to section 6, which is on page 24 of the framework, which is entitled Building a Strong Competitive Economy. And at paragraph 85, it says, planning policies and decisions should help create the conditions in which businesses can invest, expand, and adapt. Significant weight should be placed on the need to support economic growth and productivity, taking into account both local business needs and wider opportunities for development. The approach taken should allow each area to build on its strengths, counter any weaknesses, and address the challenges of the future. This is particularly important where Britain can be a global leader in driving innovation and in areas with high levels of productivity, which should be able to capitalize on their performance and potential. Now, that's obviously classic NPPF general policy, which could be applied in a whole range of different contexts. I want you to just comment on how that might be applied specifically in the context that we're dealing with here, namely the film sector and specifically the West London cluster.
Yeah, I mean, it just, I mean, it could be written for the sector and the cluster, to be honest. We have already heard from other witnesses that we're a global leader in the sector. We've already heard that there are high levels of productivity, that it's a sought after sector for young people to work in. In terms of that first sentence, the planning system can only do so much in terms of creating those conditions, but to create those conditions to allow businesses to invest, expand, adapt. That's exactly what this proposal is aiming to do for the sector. So I think absolutely everything in there is applicable, and we've already heard evidence. In terms of building on its strengths, the area, this is, by Buck's own policy, one of its primary sectoral strengths. It's got a specialism in this sector. The jobs are valuable, sought after. They have the institutions to train people up to deliver those skills. So it's definitely something that ticks that box in terms of building on its strengths. I think in terms of countering any weaknesses and addressing the challenges of the future, again, we've heard previous evidence on that, about making sure that we continue to invest in a sector and provide facilities that are fit for purpose. That links to the academy, this skills academy. It links to the quality of design, all of those elements which will enable the UK to continue to be competitive in the future in a sector that we're already a global leader. So I think it meets everything that is set out in that paragraph.
At 86, we then see planning policies should set out a clear economic vision and strategy which positively and proactively encourages sustainable economic growth, having regard to the National Industrial Strategy. We'll look at the National Industrial Strategy in a moment, but just picking up on that word proactively, obviously there's been some evidence, and there's some evidence indeed in your proof, about what's referred to as missed opportunities in the past, where there was perceived to be a shortage of sound stages, studio space to accommodate films in the UK, them going elsewhere. So just again, situating the general language of the framework on this particular point and the encouragement to be proactive, how does that fit in with the appeal scheme in this particular case?
Well, I do think there is a tendency of decision makers to be reactive and not proactive. And I think for me, as an economist, the frustrating thing is when we focus very much on the sort of the short term, and we don't think about a few years away, medium term, long term, and being proactive and ensuring that actually we deliver the infrastructure that will facilitate that growth in the future. And we all know planning decisions take time. It then takes time to build things. So in terms of being proactive, I think we've got to have a longer than short-term vision in mind to ensure that we do provide those facilities, because yes, we might not be in the absolute worst position in terms of capacity at the moment, but in terms of where the industry is potentially going, we could very easily be there again. And I think the evidence of Ms. Waite was interesting in that regard yesterday. So for me, it really is that we're proactively and making sure we invest now for the future.
And then finally at 87, we have planning policies and decisions should recognise and address the specific locational requirements of different sectors. This includes making provision for clusters, creative industries, and for new and expanded or upgraded facilities and infrastructure that are needed to support the growth of these industries. Again, general wording of the framework. How do you apply that to the specific context that we're dealing with here?
Well, I don't think anyone's in disagreement across the witnesses we've heard from that we do have a cluster here, a West London cluster. There are lots of benefits of clusters. That's why we tend to support them. You know, they're more productive, they're more likely to grow, and there's lots of evidence of that in terms of past academic papers, past government positions. I think one of the things as well with clusters is that it is much easier to support and grow an existing cluster than it is to set up a new cluster, and it is policy to, as we read here, to do just that, to grow existing clusters. So and clusters can decline. We shouldn't take them for granted. We do need to provide the right facilities, infrastructure to ensure that they continue to grow, and that's exactly what this paragraph says.
Thank you. And we see at footnote 43 of the framework on page 24 that the national industrial strategy that the framework refers to is Invest 2035, the UK's modern industrial strategy, and we have that in the core documents at CD 624. Just take you to that now. This is dated October 2024. It's a green paper. And we'll start, please, with the foreword, which is on the second page, the fourth PDF page. We have the foreword here from the Chancellor of the Exchequer. First sentence, growth is the #1 mission of this government, and our new industrial strategy is central to that growth mission. And then we see the vision, a 10-year plan to deliver the certainty and stability businesses need to invest in the high growth sectors that will define our growth mission. And can I just ask you, there's obviously a reference here to the 10-year plan and looking ahead 10 years. And obviously as an economist, you probably have something you can helpfully add about why we need to plan for that kind of time frame. Do you want to just offer any comments in relation to that?
Well, I guess, yeah, sort of building on what I said earlier about not just thinking about the short term, there is a need to make sure we have the infrastructure in the 10-year, in a more medium-term horizon. And I think that first sentence as well, growth is the #1 mission. We're not aiming to just do the status quo to tick along. We need to grow, and the reason we need to grow is because we need more, at the simplest term, money coming into the economy to then be recirculated and invest and enable us to invest in the economy in terms of other infrastructure and skills and education and so on. And so I think it's really telling for me that we're trying to go above and beyond. And this is a sector, as we've already heard, where we really stand. We have a global competitive advantage, and that's one of the few areas that we really can try and grow globally. And sorry, and coming back to your question, which was 10 years, yeah, I think it's important to plan for that longer term horizon. And I'm pretty sure if you look at any of the forecasts, even in both sides evidence, that once you look at the 10-year horizon, acknowledging that forecasting 10 years forward is always uncertain, that nearly everyone would agree that this is a sector that is going to grow and there will be need in that horizon.
So the government is saying we need to look at 10 years. You as an economist is saying we need to look at 10 years. Let's just understand how the industry looks at this as well. and go to CD 1332, which is the House of Commons Culture, Media and Sport Committee oral evidence record. CD 1332. And then it's PDF page 3, where Benjamin King, who is the Senior Director of Public Policy at Netflix, is answering a question from the chair about his company's view of the UK as a destination for making TV and film, whether it's changed at all in the last few years or has it remained the same. And we see Mr. King in the second paragraph of his response says, the long-term potential for the UK is materially unaffected by what has happened in the last couple of years. We feel very bullish about its potential. Some of you may already be aware that it is the second most important market for Netflix from a production perspective globally. For the last few years, we have been spending over $1.5 billion every year on UK-made content. This is over $6 billion since 2020. We are very invested in the long-term success of the creative ecosystem. We put that down to the very deep roots here. We're certainly committed for the long term. Our appetite for investing in UK content and the attractiveness of UK content and the UK as a global destination for production is every bit as strong as it has ever been. And then we get, at the same time, we cannot afford to be complacent. My message to policymakers today would be to think hard about the industry that we want to have in 10 years' time, not just the one that we have today. In particular, we need to keep a very keen eye on other markets to ensure that we retain our competitive edge. This is an industry that countries around the world are waking up to the attractiveness of and are intent on seeking to recreate. We need to index our own competitiveness against that of our nearest neighbours when it comes to other production destinations around the world. If we can do that, then the UK is in a very good spot for the long term. So again, consistency or otherwise between the policymakers, the government, the economists, yourself, and the industry. Is there a consistency or an inconsistency in the long-term need to plan?
Complete consistency. I think the other thing I would add there is the comment about we can't afford to be complacent, and that competition point, that if we just sit still and we don't invest in the industry, we don't have the best in class, there's a chance we lose our competitive edge. And the industry is saying that as well.
So if we just pivot back now to the industrial strategy, we've looked at the forward. Let's just go into the meat of the report briefly and go to specifically page 22, where the industrial strategy specifically considers the creative industries. It's PDF 24, internal page 22, right at the bottom. And just for context, the creative industries is, as we understand from this document, one of a number of what are called growth driving sectors. We see at the top of page 21, growth driving sectors, or otherwise known as in the framework as the priority sector for growth. And in relation to the creative industries, the industrial strategy is as follows. The UK's creative industries are world leading, showcasing the best of its creativity and culture to the world. According to the UN Trade and Development, the UK is the third largest creative services exporter behind the US and Ireland, worth 87 billion in 2022. There's a reference then to the streaming. And then the UK is a global centre for screen production with £4.23 billion in production spend in 2023, of which 78% was from inward investment. According to the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre, the creative industries accounted for 67% of the UK's digital exports in 2021. And then we get the sector is expected to grow worldwide, creating further growth opportunities. The sector is highly innovative, attracting significant inward investment and producing goods and services that are world-renowned. PwC estimates that the global entertainment and media sector will grow to 3.4 trillion by 2028. Half of global trade is expected to be digital by 2050. And then we see, to enable growth in the sector, the government will leverage UK creative industries' global competitive advantages by unlocking private investment, boosting exports and developing its highly skilled workforce. So again, picking up on that issue of the skills shortage. Having seen this, is it part of or not the industrial strategy of this government to address the need for a highly skilled workforce?
Absolutely part of it, yes.
And then the government needs to ensure that the UK sector remains globally competitive as a home for world-class talent while maximising access to important markets to tour and collaborate. The sector plays an important role in driving growth across regions and nations through creative clusters and corridors across the country that spread opportunity and prosperity in communities, as well as driving growth by enhancing access to skills, spillovers and knowledge sharing. So again, Mrs. Evans, you've heard a lot from the appellant's need witnesses about the need for this particular appeal scheme. In your experience and having looked at this from a government policy perspective, to what extent is the government policy on this and the industrial strategy consistent with the message that is being received by the appellant's need witnesses, or inconsistent?
Completely consistent and couldn't be more supportive. Yep.
And then finally, just linking this in with the planning system and the role of the planning system vis-a-vis the industrial strategy. Can I take you to the last paragraph of page 34, PDF 36 of the industrial strategy, concerning, it's headed Planning, Infrastructure and Transport, where it says, an effective planning system is a fundamental enabler for business investment in our growth driving sectors. At the national and regional level, planning constraints hold back growth, including in high-performing life sciences clusters and so on, noting your previous experience on that particular point. So again, you're understanding you're not obviously a planning witness, planning specialist, but you are giving evidence on economic benefits. What is the role that you see the planning system playing in the overall industrial strategy vis-a-vis the creative industries, for example?
I think it needs to stop being a blocker and start being an enabler, just as the wording says here. Sorry, it doesn't say the stop being a blocker, but it does say being an enabler.
Certainly the language of some of the senior politicians over the last week. Right. Thank you. That's everything I wanted to ask you about the industrial strategy. One final reference to national policy, please. In your proof, we go to paragraph 3.48. Which is on page PDF 24. We see, as well as the industrial strategy, you say the government has released a creative industries sector plan, highlighting their commitment to growing the sector and their recognition of its importance. As part of the plan, Labour aimed to focus on providing a creative education for every child in England, recognising the need to foster creative and technical skills in the existing workforce and next generation. And again, just situating that evidence in the discussions that we've been having in this inquiry about the skill shortage. What do you see the government to be doing about that, if anything?
The government is aiming to be positive, make a positive step and train up the next generation to have the right skills to go into this industry.
Thank you. So I just want to zoom in briefly on Buckinghamshire specifically. Again, we don't need to go through what you've said in detail, but at section 3, at the beginning of section 3 of your proof, which starts on page 15, you talk about Buckinghamshire's economic growth objectives, and at table 4 at 3.8, you refer to some of the local strategies. Just collectively, if we look at what Buckinghamshire have said they want to achieve in terms of economic growth, specifically in relation to the creative sector, what support, if any, does that provide for considering the economic benefits that are going to be arising from this appeal scheme if it's granted planning permission?
Well, Buckinghamshire's policy identifies the assets it already has in this sector. It identifies that it's one of their key specialisms, and it talks about wanting to grow and build upon those assets and those specialisms. So I would say it's all positive in that regard.
Thank you. So that's the context, both more locally at the county level and at the national level. Let's now go to section 2 of your evidence, sort of backtracking slightly to earlier on in your proof, where you consider the economic impacts. And again, the inspector will be familiar with your evidence, so we can take some of this as read. But just to understand, you start by looking at the construction phase. Do you understand there to be much of a dispute, if any, between you and the council in relation to the benefits arising during the construction phase?
I don't think so, no. So I think that's broadly accepted.
Okay, well, let's focus on things that might be more contentious then, and look at the operational phase. And let's start with gross direct employment. Now, there's been some consideration in the rebuttal evidence, particularly in respect of the Rule 6 party, about some of your evidence in relation to direct employment figures. Can I just understand your view, having heard those criticisms, read those rebuttal proofs, heard the comments made? What would you like to say to the inspector in relation to how she should take your evidence on direct employment for the purposes of this appeal?
Yeah, of course. So I presented a range. When we did the original work and for the socioeconomic chapter and the economic case, historically, we utilised what I will describe, and I'll explain what it is, but the densities approach, which is largely accepted and used in pretty much every application. When I came to revise and refine this work, I wanted to make sure I was there had been challenges at the original committee as to whether jobs would be supported. I wanted to make sure I reviewed all available methods and sources. As a result of that, I reviewed different applications for studios that had been made and looked at the different approaches they'd taken. So what I do here is I update the employment density approach using a wider range of densities that have been used in some of those applications. That's what I describe in my appendix as method 1. And then method 2 takes a different approach, and that results in higher numbers. I guess what I would say, based on having reviewed the rebuttal evidence, is that there is far greater weight and support for the densities method, which is at the lower end of those estimates. And those numbers, the sort of roughly 2,000 full-time equivalents, 2,300 jobs, are fully in line with the numbers that we set out in the original application. When you look at the appendix to this proof of evidence, I talk through where I've taken those densities from, and there are, we don't need to go to every single one, but I think effectively that method and those densities are used across a lot of other planning applications for studios. So they're listed in the appendix, whereas the other method is used less frequently and is less consistent with other industries and other approaches. So I would guide you to take that lower end that's based on densities. Taking that densities approach in a little bit more detail, I note, and it's factually accurate, that Mr. Kershaw in his evidence talks about the fact that, you know, providing space doesn't just necessarily mean it will be full and create jobs, and that's absolutely true. The extent to which those jobs, I think I would separate the two issues. One is thinking about what the space could accommodate and what is the appropriate method to estimate those job numbers. And then the second is about extent of displacement, and that links very closely to the needs case and the extent to which those jobs could to any extent be displaced from other studios. So if we just focus on the first of those issues to start with, the density approach, as I say, there is guidance. I've quoted the HCA Employment Density Guide that has a variety of types of floor space and gives you ranges of densities. It's not a perfect science. I'm the first to say that, even when looking at more standard floor space types, office jobs, that can vary depending on if you're a call centre right through to, and we've now got shared offices and so on. So there's definitely evolution of that. We've heard a lot about comparison to hotels within the guidance. Again, it gives you a range for hotels, so that there is always variation. But what I tried to do was to look at the different densities that were in the guidance and then what had been used in different studio applications, and apply my judgment and those ranges. Finally, just one point on that. There's a challenge, I think, in Mr. Kershaw's rebuttal that these numbers aren't validated with reality to see whether, so you might have lots of planning applications that all claim XYZ jobs, but has anyone proved that those numbers are roughly right? I would say as an industry, we're not very good at doing that latter thing, but in this instance, there are a few, and there are core documents in around Pinewood, Shepperton, Leavesden that do report existing, because obviously they have the benefit of being existing studios that are proposing expansions. And many of those documents do quote their existing job numbers, and they use those existing job numbers and their existing size, floor space, sound space, stage space, etc., to come up with an appropriate density to use. So I don't think that's a fair criticism, because other studios have presented their own job numbers and have, I would say, validated that those numbers are accurate. It is fair to say there is variation definitely in those studios. So it's not as I say, a perfect science, but the estimates that the range we get from that density approach, I think is something that you can rely on as being a reasonable basis for those estimates.
And you mentioned displacement. We'll come on to consider displacement, but just there's obviously a lot of numbers, and if you're, let's say, Mr. White, you're obviously going to be quite bewildered by the number of numbers that we're dealing with here. So just to simplify things for his benefit, if you had to come up with a number, obviously the inspector's going to be carrying out a planning balance, recommending a planning balance. For the purposes of that planning balance, is there a number or a rough number or a range that you say to the inspector, this is how many jobs this development is going to create? What would you be saying to her?
No economist ever likes to give one number, but I would say that the numbers that I've put in my minimum are fully defensible, and those would be the ones I would be more likely to go to. If you refer back to the economic case, that gives a range which is probably around a few hundred jobs either way around that minimum number. So I would say that number and that range is where I would state my claim if pushed to do so.
So if we're looking at table 1 of your proof, then on bottom of page 9, just help the inspector understand how that fits in with what you say there. What are the numbers that she should be working with?
Well, that says, and again, sorry, lots of numbers, but that gives 2,060 full-time equivalents, and then in brackets after it, 2,300 jobs. So that's allowing for the fact that you will have part-time working, so they won't all be full-time equivalent, full-time positions. So I would say that number is a good estimate of the likely number of gross direct. So that's the number that will actually be on site.
And then you're looking at the issue of displacement at 2.22 onwards. Just help the inspector. There's been some discussion of displacement. Obviously, as an economist, it's a concept which you're well versed in applying in other contexts. Yeah. How does the issue of displacement apply here? And importantly, how does the issue of displacement and the question of economic benefits relate to the need question, i.e., what effect does the need issue have on the assessment of displacement?
I would say that the two are intricately linked, and I think Mr. Kershaw described this actually quite effectively. I would agree with him that that the extent to which you believe the needs case is fundamental to what you think about displacement. So displacement in its simplest sense is just how many of these jobs would have happened somewhere else if we didn't build this. So, if you build one new spangly office block next to a really old tired office block, and the tenants of the old tired office block just move to the new spangly one, and nothing happens with the old one, 100% displacement. If, however, one tenant from next door moves in and then they expand because they take more space and then they employ more people. You might have some portion of displacement. Similarly, if people move in, but then actually the competition as a result of having that grade A space there means that the neighbouring one is redeveloped or invested in or refurbished such that you still generate jobs, again, you wouldn't get 100% displacement. So it's very much linked to the extent to which we believe there is a need.
Okay, so just applying that then, if one takes the appellant's evidence on need and talks about the inward investment and the creation of additional, or the ability to meet the what was referred to by Mr. Chodorowicz as the addressable market, the global addressable market, what effect would that have on the question of displacement economically?
So you mean what Mr. Chodorowicz talked about, the ability to grow the market? Yes. Well, if we're able to grow the UK's market share, then we would have very low displacement.
And the displacement percentage that you've applied, you say at 2.28, is 25% to the direct employment created at Marlow Film Studios. Just explain to the inspector, you refer to that being a conservative figure. Just help the inspector understand why you've applied 25%.
Well, I do think it's conservative. If you go up to 2.25, I've given some examples of what levels of displacement other studios have taken, and they've taken 0 and 10%, 15%, and the geography does matter at that stage. But we're looking at a national level here. My professional view is that I have on some nationally significant, totally new schemes argued that displacement will be close to zero, but I do think in most industries you will get some displacement, it's fair to say, and so I felt that it was appropriate to acknowledge some in the guidance, in the additionality guide. They have what they call ready reckoners, and they have 25% as a low, 50 as a medium, and 75% as a high displacement. So I felt it was conservative and appropriate to apply a low displacement rate of 25%. I think it could be lower than that, but in terms of putting a figure to it, that was what I went with for those reasons.
And how does your evidence on displacement fit in with what we heard yesterday from Mr. Davis about his assessment being that if you built out Marlow Film Studios, then you would be meeting a certain amount of demand that way, and that some of the repurposed industrial buildings that had previously been used for studio space would be repurposed back to other industrial uses? How does that fit in with your evidence?
Well, that would be some displacement happening. I would argue that is what happens in a competitive and well-forming market. And I guess what I would add is that those industries, we're in a situation where we have quite high need in this country for a lot of uses. So if those industrial uses get repurposed into industrial data centres, even residential, quite a lot of industrial sites are going to residential, that would still be a net positive for the UK economy in terms of growing those other industries as well.
Thank you. You then set out the application of the multiplier. You don't need to go over that in detail. And accounting for leakage. Again, these are all conventional, as I understand it, conventional economic tools that are used in terms of assessing economic benefits. Production expenditure at 2.41, GVA and tax receipts. These are those elements of the economic benefits that were considered in the committee report that we looked at earlier on, recognised by the council. With that in mind, can we now go to section 4 of your proof, where you talk about Marlow and how it will maximise the benefits? This is the last part of your evidence in chief.
Yes.
And just want to understand, you've obviously looked at the the national context and the Bucks context, looked at the economic benefits. And now specifically in relation to the scheme, at 4.2, you set out specifically what the education hub would be delivering. Do you want to just summarise for the inspector what you're trying to say there?
Yeah, so we worked collaboratively with the client to try and think about what commitments and pledges they could make to really ensure that this is making a positive impact for local people. And what's set out there is a series of commitments to training places with a focus on local people and inclusivity, bursaries, a skills oversight board, visits for children to hopefully inspire them to go into the industry, an employment and skills coordinator, and then a commitment to a representative meeting with the skills advisory panel. I guess what I would say about all of those is that having worked on lots of projects, this is a pretty exemplary set of commitments. That a lot of projects don't make any commitments. Some make the bare minimum. This is something where they've really thought about what are the needs of the industry and how can we positively contribute, particularly for local people. One of the things one of the negatives of the industry is that it doesn't do well on metrics with regards to gender balance and people from different socioeconomic backgrounds and ethnicity. And I think that these commitments to having weighting on those sorts of candidates are really positive. Clearly, no one scheme is going to fundamentally answer all skills and other issues that an industry has, but I think it's really positive that they're putting forward these sorts of commitments. And then specifically around the school children point, one of the things we find when we look at kids is that they need to see what the job opportunities might be. They need to understand the full range of sort of opportunities that might be open to them. They need to see people that look and feel like them, to think that they might have the opportunity to go into those industries. So to have the commitments to having visits from school children, I think is a really positive thing to inspire the next generation as well.
And with that package in mind, is the appeal scheme, or is what has been identified in the evidence as a skills shortage, is that a reason to grant or refuse planning permission for this scheme?
Without getting on my soapbox, I think it's a real negative to suggest that we shouldn't invest because of a skills shortage. We have the ability to positively alter skills. There's a national policy, there's a Bucks policy, and there is Marlow Film Studios commitments all aligned to doing that. This is an industry that, I mean, let's face it, it's a lot more exciting and sexy than most of the industries we work in. My kids would be much, much more excited to go into it. It's not an industry where we're struggling to get kids excited to want to go into it. So, we're pushing on an open door, if you like, there. And going back to the cluster point, it's not as though we're starting from scratch either. We've got some world leading provision of these skills already present in the area. So I'm not saying it's really simple to suddenly double your provision, but it's easier to do that from a base of knowing the course content, having the tutors, having that track record so that you can attract people to come in and study. So my view would be we shouldn't be not investing in a sector because of a skills shortage. We should be addressing the skills shortage to facilitate growth in a sector, particularly one like this where we're globally competitive and leading.
Thank you. And you may recall on day one of the inquiry, there was some questions of Mr. Jason Pryor, the architect or the master planner for the scheme, about quantum of development. And in your proof at paragraph 4.7 from table 7, you've sought to compare an 18-stage studio facility and an 8-stage studio facility in terms of the benefits in the context of supply chain opportunities. Can you just talk through, the inspector, what your conclusions are in that respect?
Yes, so we're looking at the extent to which a larger facility can support more production effectively, and table 7. And in terms of it has the space to allow films to be in preparation as well as being actually produced at the same time. So there's the kind of benefits of scale at that point. I think in terms of the jobs and supply chain, what it really does is that it gives the certainty that there's going to be a market to sell your wares to. So if you're a carpenter, you might be able to effectively be pretty much full-time employed here on different, admittedly freelance and on different projects, but that scale gives you the certainty to expand your business, set up, expand, and have a base in the area. So I think it's positive from a supply chain perspective in terms of certainty of sort of scale of opportunities.
And then finally, you've looked at additionality benefits at 4.8 onwards. We don't need to go over that because that's largely repeating the need evidence that the inspector's already heard about. And then just finally, in your conclusion section of 5.4, you discuss what you identify, and again, using an economist's phrase of an opportunity cost, the opportunity cost of not securing this activity by granting permission for the scheme. What do you see as being the consequence of refusal of this appeal in terms of the economic future of Marlow, of Bucks, of the UK?
I think there's a massive opportunity cost. I think the UK, we've already heard, I don't think it's disputed that we've got a comparative advantage. We are globally leading in this industry. If we just rest on our laurels and don't invest in it, others are chomping at the bit to take that place, to invest in new facilities. I love numbers. There are lots of numbers in here, possibly too many, but it's really quite simple. You don't need to know which of those numbers you want to agree with, particularly to know that this is a globally competitive industry, that we are that we have the chance to grow, and there has never been a more aligned set of national, local policies to do so. You've got the industry wanting to grow. I think that the risk of not investing in a sector like this means that we could weaken our global position. It could decline. I'm not saying it necessarily would, but it could. It's a risk, and we miss out on those opportunities. I think it's rare in any of our professional careers to work on projects that genuinely have the chance of being kind of game changing, and I think this is one of those.
Mrs. Evans, thank you very much. That's the evidence in chief, madam.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bird, you've said about an hour.
Probably less, madam, I should think.
Do you want to take do you need a comfort break or anything before you?
I need the loo if that's okay.
Absolutely fine.
Sorry.
So I did it the other day. Could we take we'll take 15 minutes, come back at 1:45? Is that okay? Okay, we're adjourned until then. Thank you.
I do have the weakest bladder in the world. I did work for Pinewood many years ago before I had children, and I can't put a precise date on it, but
Okay.
it would have been pre-2010.
Right. So over a decade ago was
Yeah.
your only other previous film experience. Was that with Bridget Rosewell?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Now, in terms of the modelling of economic impacts of film and HETV studios, you are essentially reliant, aren't you, on unpredictable patterns in terms of occupation?
You mean whether the scheme would be occupied? Or,
Well,
or you
even
mean
if it is occupied, the extent of the occupation over a given year.
yes,
Yeah.
it's true in many industries. Yep.
There's no predictable split between film and high-end television, is there?
No, I would say past rates are a good indication and forecasts, but you're right. Yes.
And no two productions are the same, as we've heard repeatedly from the industry witnesses.
Yes.
So they all present challenges, don't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you tell us, I think in 114 of your proof, that you are reliant on the appellant's other witnesses now in relation to the Need case, and that includes Knight Frank.
Yes.
And I don't understand you to dispute any of their work.
No.
Good. Then you were taken in your evidence in chief to the MPPF. So if we could just turn that up, please. Section 6 to which you were taken and paragraph 24. Building a strong competitive economy.
Page 24. Yes.
Yes, you have that. You were taken to paragraph 85 and 86. I want you to go to paragraph 87, please, which refers to planning policies and decisions should recognise and address the specific locational requirements of different sectors. This includes making provision for clusters or networks of knowledge and data-driven, creative or high technology industries, and for new expanded or upgraded facilities infrastructure that are needed to support the growth of these industries, including data centres and grid connections. We see that, don't we, reference to the issue of need?
We do. Yes.
Yes. The MPPF is not, is it, as it were, growth at all costs?
No.
No. So a balance is required, isn't it?
Absolutely. But growth is clearly relevant within that balance.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's a very important consideration in the balance.
Yeah.
And in terms of the sector, we know, don't we, as a matter of fact, that Buckinghamshire Council has granted planning permission for a very sizable expansion of Pinewood Studios.
We do.
Which would make it the world's largest film studios.
I believe that's true. Yes.
Yes. That's relevant pipeline supply, isn't it?
It is. Yes.
Yes. Equally, it granted planning permission for expansion of the Wickham Film Studios, didn't it?
Yes. I think we have heard uncertainty regarding both, but yes.
But again, relevant, would have been relevant pipeline supply had the market been interested in bringing it forward.
Yes.
Yes. And as far as the green paper that you were asked about, core document 6.24, that's in COAT, isn't it, at the moment? It's a green paper.
Yes.
And if we go within it, please, to page 16 first.
16, sorry.
16.16. We can see what the government says in terms of their approach to a modern industrial strategy, which includes the creative industries. And it tells us what the next stage is going to be, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes. So the next stage of the industrial strategy is identifying those subsectors within these broad sectors that meet their objectives and for which there is evidence that policy can address the barriers to growth.
That's what it says. Yep.
Good. And then within that context, please go to page 19.
Yes.
We can see bottom of the page, the next step, which includes the next step in relation to the creative industries, will be the ambitious and targeted sector plans for each of the 8 growth driving sectors.
Correct?
Yeah, so we await that, but there is as yet no government indication that it identifies any need for additional film studio infrastructure to support the creative sectors, is there?
On that specific point, no. I think it's very clear from the wording in here, they're around designing ambitious sector plans and the growth sectors, and they do explicitly mention that we have a global advantage in the paragraph we went to earlier. So
Yes.
there is clear desire to grow the sector.
Yes, and no doubt when they're devising their growth sector growth plan in due course, they will have regard to the available pipeline supply amongst other considerations, won't
Yes,
they?
yes,
And the extent to which that would facilitate growth.
yes. They will look at pipeline. They will look at quality of that pipeline. All of the
Yes.
things that have been discussed.
They'll also look at skills, won't they, and the ability to skill up in tandem with the forecast growth, because it has
Yes.
to be a realistic growth plan, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
Yes, growth plan which fails will be harmful to the national interest.
Yes, I think I would say having no aspiration for growth is far more harmful, but failing on a growth plan, yes, would be
Yes,
have some
well,
harm.
No one has no aspiration for growth, do they?
No, but
And Buckinghamshire doesn't have no aspiration for growth. That's why it has granted planning permission for over 600,000 square feet of sound stages at Pinewood,
Yes.
one of the world's leading film studios.
agreed. But
Yeah.
this does, as I say, talk about ambition and
Yeah.
aspiration, which I think can go further.
Yes, but which has to be balanced, as you've already
Absolutely,
accepted.
yes.
Yeah. Now, in terms of your assessment, it assumes, doesn't it, that the Marlow Film Studios stage space capacity, sorry, without the Marlow Film Studios stage space capacity, UK film and high-end television production would be constrained.
Yes, but I think by having a low level of displacement, it assumes that this would be additional. So yes.
Yes, good. And so effectively your position is that Marlow Film Studios would compete for business that the UK currently loses out on?
Yes, I also think it would make the whole sector more competitive by bringing that best-in-class quality element, which would make the rest of the sector also up its game. But yes, it would compete for activity the UK misses out on.
Which the pipeline supply, to the extent that it comes forward, would also be capable of competing for, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yes. And it's not your evidence, is there, that that pipeline supply, for example, Pinewood, is any less likely to come forward than Marlow Film Studios, is it? If
Well,
the demand is there.
I think based on that's it's not my evidence around likelihood of different schemes coming forward, but I think you've heard from other need witnesses about the likelihood of different schemes.
Well, what have you factored into in terms of your displacement percentage, in terms of the other supply coming forward?
Well, we were assuming that we were allowing for the fact there would be some supply coming forward in the pipeline.
How much supply were you allowing to come forward in your displacement?
Well, I would say it's aligned with the Knight Frank view of their, I think they have a 1.3 million square feet coming forward in the short term to match the demand in that to 2029, I think it is from memory.
So again,
I think that's the number in Knight Frank's. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Separate matter, please, which is the operational phase employment. You could take up core document 1234, please, the economic case for development.
Yes.
Okay, within that to page 62.
Yep.
You've got table 6, which is the net additional employment.
Correct.
Which in terms of the net direct jobs identified 1,600 to 2,170.
Yes.
And if we go back a page to 7.4, we can see that when accounting for part-time working, your forecast was 2,015 to 2,735 as a range.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
in the table as well. That's the gross additional jobs.
Yeah,
The first row.
appreciate
Yep.
Which may be compared with the figures that you set out in your proof of evidence. Let's turn those up. On the bottom of page 12. Uh, 2,300 to 4,640.
Sorry, which table are we in?
Sorry, your employment figure table.
Table 2.
Yep, on top of page, goes over from 9 to 10.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought we were on page 12.
Sorry, my glasses. It's 9 and 10.
It's the
Table 1.
gross direct jobs, the 2,060 on the first row is the
Yeah,
one.
but I think we have to allow for the part-time, don't we? So it.
So that's the 2,300 in
Exactly.
brackets.
So
Yes.
the 2,300, the 4,640.
Yes.
Yeah. And as I understand your evidence in chief, you're saying to the inspector that no weight should be given to your new maximum figure of 4,160, which reflects your second methodology, and that the weight should be accorded to the density approach effectively.
I think the density approach is more robust, yeah,
Yes.
and those numbers, the 2,060 full-time equivalents or 2,300 jobs are roughly in the middle of the range in the previous table 6 we went to.
Yeah, where do we find that caveat in your evidence?
I don't think I do state. I think I say later on that there is uncertainty around the different methods. What I was trying to do was be transparent in presenting the different methods that are available to us.
Well, forgive me. You knew that part of your role as the expert of the inquiry is to identify the benefits so that the inspector to gauge what weight they should be accorded.
Yes.
Didn't you think it appropriate to set out in clear terms that she should not attach weight to your higher estimate?
I don't specifically talk about the weight she would give in my evidence, but
No.
yes, I probably could have been clearer as to which numbers were more robust than others. I think.
Yes. Were you here when Councillor Crabtree gave her evidence?
I wasn't, unfortunately.
Did you watch online?
Not for that one, sorry.
It was put to her that she had misunderstood your figures in terms of the employment numbers. It was put to her that it was a misunderstanding that you were predicting higher numbers. It's not a misunderstanding. That's what your proof says, isn't it?
It says that there are lots of different methods and that there could be a higher number, yes.
Yes. And now you're saying don't attach any weight to the higher number.
I'm saying the lower is the most likely, that there is always uncertainty in these matters. And my personal view is that it is right to be transparent about where those different methods can take you. So that's why I included the range of numbers.
Well, it's also important to be transparent, to express as a matter of professional judgment whether where you've been taken to by the methodology is a sound destination, isn't it? And you didn't, did you?
I think that's a fair.
Yes. And just while we're on that point, did you ask Mr. Dix whether there might be any highways implications from your higher forecast in terms of person trip generation?
We didn't discuss that.
Right. What would your 4,160 indicate in terms of people on the site? Persons on the site.
It's hard to give you a completely definitive answer on that because the method that comes from Brace Studios it's not clear the extent to which they are including within that jobs directly supported that could be largely done or in part done on site and off site. The level of detail in those documents is not clear enough to be able to give you a definitive answer. It would be fair to say with a larger number that there would be more than with a smaller number, clearly.
Right. Okay. And in terms of your employment numbers generally, they assume, don't they, that to the extent there is competition, grade A would only compete with grade A film studios.
I think competition is probably a bit more complicated than that, but largely yes, they're competing for predominantly those higher end activities, which other grade A studios would otherwise accommodate. Yeah.
And we can see that at paragraph 2.27, page 10.
That's where I'm talking about the extent of displacement. Yes.
Well, yes, where you refer to the host major host major feature films, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And where you there refer to hosting major feature films, you go to core document 2-44, which was your response to LSH.
Sorry, which of the
2-44.
Sorry. I've got that open, yes.
Just go to PDF page 4, please. Paragraph 1.5 and the
Yes.
5th bullet point, which I assume you wrote on instructions from your client, did you?
We wrote this report in response to the LSH on instruction, yeah.
Yes, so the point you were making in the response to LSH, who pointed out that high-end television is in fact made across the UK outside the West London cluster, that in fact what Marlow Film Studios would be competing for was those productions with a minimum core expenditure of $9 million per broadcast hour.
Yes, the wording I use is designed to accommodate and focused upon. That doesn't preclude other things as well, but yes, I think that is it's fair to say that's the primary focus.
Right. And so, and that you have allowed for and taken into account, presumably in your economic analysis that we see in your proof.
Yes.
Right, good. Then in terms of the displacement factor, do you like on page 10, please?
Sorry, are we back in my proof of evidence?
Yeah,
now?
we are, please. And it's 222 and following.
Yes.
You refer there in 225 to levels of displacement in other planning applications, all of which, save the Gillette Studios, date from 2022 or before.
They do?
Yes. At a period when there was unsatisfied demand.
There was?
Yeah.
Yes.
Gillette is the exception 2024, but presumably you've read Mr. Davis's evidence and his assessment as to the role that would perform in the industry, have you?
I have. I have at some point, but I haven't. I wouldn't say I have that top of my mind, but yes, I have read it at some point.
Okay, it's a different offer, isn't it?
Yes.
It would be a very different offer,
Yes.
I can put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I think if we can go please to page 12 of your evidence, where you've done the leakage calculation, and this is just point of clarification I wanted to seek from you.
Mhm.
In terms of the minimum 3,095 net additional full-time equivalents that Marlow Studios would support, approximately 535 would be taken up by Buckinghamshire residents. That includes, doesn't it, the 535 indirect employment?
Yes, that's net additional. So that includes direct and indirect.
Yeah.
Yes.
What would be the benefit in terms of the direct employment?
I don't think we have that number in here. It would probably, as a simplistic approach, be, well, actually, no, it wouldn't quite be fair to just take the proportion 535 over 3095 and multiply it by the 2000, because there will be slightly different commuting patterns based on origin and destination of opportunities. So indirect will be in a wider area. So it wouldn't quite be as simple as that, but that would be one way of doing it as a property, I guess.
And what would you end up with?
About 1/6 of 2,300 jobs, which would be about can I get a calculator?
So glad a mathematician has to get a calculator. This would be.
I was going to say 400, and it's about 400. Yeah.
Okay, good. That's helpful. And all others, therefore, are commuting from outside Buckinghamshire to the site.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting, whenever you do anything based on commuting patterns, and particularly, commuting patterns generally are quite hard to use. They're even worse with the 2021 census because obviously of when it was taken. So, and they reflect historic patterns. So it would be possible for that to be increased if the Skills Academy and if other things change in the future. But that's based on historic commuting patterns. Yeah.
I appreciate that. And in terms, then, final points, again, this is just clarification, in terms of the GVA calculation, that of course is sensitive, isn't it, to the number of direct jobs which are supported. So it goes back to the jobs calculation.
It goes back to the direct, and I've presented direct and net additional, but yes, you're quite right.
But in terms of the tax receipt, that again turns on the.
They're all interlinked. Yeah.
Absolutely. So good. That's all I have. Thank you very much, madam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we need to do a swap. It's only just 12:10. Do you want to take lunch now? Or, yeah, you're nodding. You might have some questions that you might need to, after Mr. Bird's gone, after we nicked all your questions yesterday. Okay, should we take an hour and come back at 1:10 then? Okay, we're adjourned until then. Thank you. And you can't speak to anybody. Well, you can, but know about the case. Thanks.